two tiny, fragile lives curled together as if the world beyond them didn't exist. A newborn fawn, all legs and innocence, and a spotted bobcat kitten no bigger than a glove, fast asleep with its head tucked beneath the fawn's chin. Predator and prey, two orphans in the middle of a natural disaster, found solace in each other. Two survivors of fire and loss, tangled in a moment of pure, impossible peace. How did they end up together? And why might keeping them together be the hardest part? This is the true story of an impossible friendship born from fire and fear, a bond so profound it became a legend. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The air, usually sweet with the scent of coastal sage and sun-baked earth, had turned acrid and thick. It tasted of ash and fear. From the hills above Santa Barbara, a monster of orange and black descended, a roaring beast born of dry winds and a single careless spark. The Jesusita fire of May 2009 did not creep. It galloped, a merciless predator chasing life from its path. For Sarah Jenkins, the director of Chester's Wildlife Rescue Center, the roar of the fire was a deafening symphony of impending loss. Her life's work was to mend the broken wings and heal the wounded paws of the wild creatures that shared their idyllic corner of California. Now, the wild was being consumed, and its inhabitants were fleeing in a terrified, chaotic exodus. Her temporary command post wasn't the familiar, organized sanctuary of her rescue center, but a cramped corner of the Santa Barbara County Emergency Operations Office. The cavernous room buzzed with the frantic energy of a war zone. Phones shrieked, radios crackled with clipped, urgent reports, and exhausted firefighters with soot-stained faces moved like ghosts through the haze that had infiltrated even this fortress of civic order. Every cage, crate, and cardboard box Sarah had was full. A barn owl with singed wingtips stared out from a dog kennel, its huge, dark eyes reflecting a terror that needed no translation. A family of raccoons huddled in a corner, the mother hissing at anyone who came too close to her wide-eyed kits. The air was a cacophony of panicked chirps, whimpers, and the low, constant hum of human anxiety. "Sarah, we've got another one." The voice belonged to Ben, a college volunteer whose youthful idealism was being forged into hardened pragmatism by the hour. He burst through the door, his face smudged with dirt and streaked with sweat. In his arms, wrapped tenderly in his own fire-retardant jacket, was a bundle so small it seemed impossible it could contain a life. He gently laid his burden on an empty patch of floor. As he unwrapped the jacket, a tiny spotted fawn unfolded onto the concrete. It couldn't have been more than a few days old, its legs as thin and unsteady as willow branches. Its coat, the color of dried honey, was peppered with the perfect white spots of infancy, but a patch along its back was darkened and crisped by the fire's kiss. It trembled violently, a full-body shudder that seemed to shake its very soul. Its ears, oversized and velvety, twitched at every new sound, and its liquid brown eyes were wide with a primal fear it was too young to comprehend. "Found her right at the edge of the fire line on Mission Canyon," Ben said, his voice husky with emotion. "No sign of the mother. I waited as long as I could." Sarah knelt, her movements slow and calming. Her heart, which had felt like a leaden weight in her chest all day, ached with a fresh pang of sorrow. A newborn fawn's only defense is to lie perfectly still, camouflaged by its spots, while its mother forages nearby. This one's mother was likely a casualty of the flames, or had been forced to abandon her baby in a desperate bid for her own survival. She's in shock, Sarah murmured, running a practiced hand over the fawn's trembling back. She could feel the frantic, hummingbird-like beat of its heart against her palm. And dehydrated. We need to get her warm and quiet, get some fluids in her. But where? Every available space was occupied by another victim of the fire. Sarah's gaze swept the chaotic room and landed on her own small island of relative calm. The metal desk where she'd been attempting to coordinate rescue efforts. Underneath it, there was a small, protected space. It wasn't ideal, but it was safe, and it was all she had. "Ben, grab those clean towels from the supply box," she commanded gently. "We'll make a nest for her under my desk. Just for a little while, until we can figure something else out." Together, they created a soft bed of terry cloth in the knee hole of the desk. Sarah carefully lifted the fawn, which weighed no more than a bag of sugar, and settled it onto the towels. The fawn immediately tried to stand on its wobbly legs, stumbled, and collapsed back into the bedding, its trembling unabated. It let out a tiny, bleeding cry, a sound of pure desolation that was nearly drowned out by the noise of the room. "It's okay, little one," Sarah whispered, stroking its neck. "You're safe now." But the words felt hollow. Safety was a fragile concept on a day like this. Just as they were tucking the towels more securely around the fawn, the door swung open again. This time it was Mike, a veteran rescuer, a man whose gruff exterior and weathered hands belied a deep, almost spiritual connection to the animals he saved. He carried a small pet carrier, and his expression was grim. "Found this little guy near a ranch in Carpinteria," he grumbled, setting the carrier down. "All by himself, dehydrated, barely moving." Sarah peered through the wire mesh of the carrier door. Curled in a tight ball was a Bobcat kitten. It was impossibly small, no more than 3 or 4 weeks old, its oversized paws and ears a promise of the formidable predator it would one day become. But now, it was just a tiny, tuft-eared baby, its spotted coat matted with dust. It looked up at her, its blue kitten eyes clouded with weakness and confusion. It was far too young to be weaned, let alone to survive on its own. Its mother, too, was almost certainly gone. Sarah's heart sank further. Another orphan, and a predator, no less. Even as a kitten, its scent could distress the other animals. She had no empty cages, and no safe place to isolate it. The relentless logistical nightmare of the day was pushing her to the breaking point. She let the kitten out of the carrier to examine it more closely. It swayed on its feet, its movements clumsy and uncoordinated. It took a few wobbly steps, then another, sniffing the air, driven by the most basic of needs: warmth, comfort, a mother's presence. And then, the impossible happened. The kitten, seemingly oblivious to the dozens of other creatures in the room, wobbled directly toward Sarah's desk. It ignored the humans, the strange smells, and the terrifying sounds. It crawled under the desk and without a moment's hesitation approached the trembling fawn. Ben took a sharp breath. "Sarah, should we—" Mike held up a hand, his eyes fixed on the scene. "Wait. Just watch." Sarah held her breath, her mind racing through a dozen disastrous scenarios. But the kitten showed no aggression. It didn't hiss or spit. Instead, it nudged its small, round head against the fawn's flank. It began to purr, a tiny, rumbling motor that was barely audible over the din of the room. Then it curled its small, spotted body into the curve of the fawn's belly, nuzzling deep into its warm fur, and rested its head on the fawn's neck. For a moment, the fawn stiffened, its trembling increasing. And then, as if a wave of peace had washed over it, its body began to relax. The violent shudders subsided into a faint quiver. It lowered its head, turning its nose toward the small creature snuggled against it. It let out a soft, low sigh, a sound of acceptance, of comfort. The tiny predator and its natural prey, two orphans of the same storm, had found solace in each other. The three rescuers stared, dumbfounded. The world outside was a maelstrom of destruction and instinct gone wild. But here, under a metal desk, in a pocket of shared warmth, instinct had been rewritten. There was no predator, no prey. There were only two babies, lost and alone, who had found each other. "Well, I'll be," Mike breathed, a rare smile cracking his stern face. "They just bonded instantly." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. Tears pricked her eyes, the first she had allowed herself all day. "In that moment," she whispered, more to herself than to the others, there was no fear, just comfort. For the next several hours, as the fire raged and more displaced animals poured in, the space under Sarah's desk became a sacred sanctuary. The kitten, whom Ben had affectionately named Bobby, slept soundly, his tiny body rising and falling in rhythm with the fawn's breathing. The fawn, who they called Bambi in a moment of unoriginal but heartfelt sentiment, stopped trembling altogether. She seemed to draw strength and calm from the small, purring furnace tucked against her. Wordlessly, the rescuers agreed to let them be. To separate them seemed a cruelty far greater than any perceived risk. They were a silent, poignant testament to what this was all about. A tiny, flickering flame of hope in a world consumed by fire. In the days that followed, as the heroic efforts of thousands of firefighters began to tame the Jesusita fire, the bond between Bobby and Bambi deepened. Sarah managed to clear out a large, quiet enclosure for them, lining it with fresh hay and soft blankets. They were rarely more than a few inches apart. Bobby, growing stronger on a diet of kitten milk replacer, would playfully bat at Bambi's velvety ears. Bambi, in turn, would patiently groom the kitten's head with her long, gentle tongue, her movements slow and maternal. They became the heart of the rescue center. Exhausted volunteers, weary from the grim task of caring for burned and traumatized animals, would make pilgrimages to their enclosure just to watch them. The sight of the bobcat kitten and the fawn curled up together, two species that should have been mortal enemies, was a powerful balm for their weary souls. It was a living, breathing parable of peace, a reminder that innocence could blossom in the most scorched and barren of landscapes. Ben took their care on as his personal mission. He documented their progress in a journal, filling pages with observations of their tender interactions. He photographed them constantly, capturing the way Bobby's head fit perfectly into the curve of Bambi's neck, the way Bambi's large, soft eyes would watch over the kitten as he slept. One photo in particular was perfect. It showed the two of them asleep under the desk on that first chaotic night, a portrait of pure, unadulterated trust. But as the weeks turned into a month, a bittersweet reality began to settle in Sarah's heart. The animals were healing. Bambi's wobbly legs had grown strong and sure. She could now stand, walk, and even take small, playful leaps around their enclosure. Bobby was transforming from a clumsy kitten into a sleek, miniature predator. He would stalk dust bunnies and pounce on rustling leaves, his wild instincts sharpening by the day. Though he never showed an ounce of aggression toward his larger friend, the blue of his eyes was giving way to the piercing feral gold of an adult bobcat. Nature and the law were clear. They couldn't stay together forever. To keep them would be to condemn them both to a life in captivity, a shadow of the existence they were born to live. Her job wasn't just to save them, but to return them to the wild, whole, and free. The process of separation was the hardest thing Sarah had had to do in a long time. They started by putting a low wire fence down the middle of their enclosure. They could still see and smell each other, could still touch noses through the mesh, but they could no longer curl up together for warmth. The first night was heartbreaking. Bambi paced the length of the fence, letting out low, mournful bleats. Bobby sat by his side of the barrier, crying a series of sharp, questioning mews, his gaze fixed on the friend he could no longer reach. The sounds echoed through the quiet rescue center, a duet of grief that tore at the hearts of the staff. Slowly, reluctantly, they began to adapt. They were moved to separate enclosures, further and further apart, until they could no longer see each other. They were weaned onto the foods they would eat in the wild. Bambi was introduced to a small group of other rescued fawns, and Bobby was encouraged to hone his hunting skills with live mice. They were being taught, piece by piece, how to forget each other, how to be what nature intended them to be, a deer and a bobcat. The day came for Bambi's release. Sarah, Ben, and Mike drove her and 2 other young deer to a protected canyon, lush with new growth that had sprung up in the wake of the fire. Ben opened the door to the transport trailer. After a moment of hesitation, the other 2 deer bounded out and disappeared into the sycamores. Bambi, however, stood for a long moment, her ears twitching, her dark eyes scanning the strange new world. She looked back at Ben, a long, searching look. He could have sworn he saw a flicker of recognition, of gratitude. Then, with a flick of her white tail, she bounded gracefully after the others, disappearing into the dappled sunlight of the forest. Ben watched until long after she was gone, a tear tracing a clean path through the dirt on his cheek. Bobby's release was a more solitary affair. A bobcat is a creature of stealth and solitude. Mike drove him deep into the Los Padres National Forest, far from human habitation, to a rocky outcrop overlooking a vast expanse of chaparral. This was his true home. Mike opened the crate. The young bobcat, now sleek and powerful, padded out into the sunlight. He was no longer the wobbly, helpless kitten from the fire. He was a perfect wild creature, every muscle and whisker attuned to the world around him. He stretched, his claws extending and retracting, and tasted the air. He turned and looked back at Mike, his golden eyes meeting the man's for a long, silent moment. It wasn't a look of affection, but of acknowledgement. A silent farewell between 2 survivors. Then, without a sound, he turned and melted into the brush, his spotted coat making him instantly invisible. He was gone. A year later, the hills of Santa Barbara were green again. The scars of the fire were still visible if you knew where to look, but nature, in its relentless, beautiful way, was healing. At the Wildlife Rescue Center, life had returned to its normal rhythm of mending and releasing. Sarah sat at her desk, the same metal desk, now piled high with paperwork. On the wall beside her hung a simple wooden frame. In it was Ben's photo from that first night. The tiny bobcat kitten and the newborn fawn curled together on a pile of towels, sleeping peacefully through the chaos. Underneath, Ben had written in careful, permanent ink, "In the fire, they found each other." Sarah often found herself staring at that photograph. She never knew what became of them. She hoped Bambi had grown into a strong, graceful doe, perhaps with a fawn of her own. She hoped Bobby had become the master of his territory, a clever and successful hunter. She knew their paths would never cross again. The bond they had shared was a fleeting, impossible miracle, a brief truce in nature's eternal war, born of a shared catastrophe. But sometimes, on quiet evenings when the air was still, she would allow herself to imagine them. She pictured a doe, pausing at the edge of a stream, her ears perked by a faint, familiar sound carried on the wind. And she pictured a solitary bobcat, resting on a high ledge, his golden eyes gazing out over the canyons, carrying in some deep, instinctual corner of his memory the faint, lingering warmth of a strange and gentle friend he had known long ago in the heart of the fire. Their story had become a legend at the center, a reminder that in the darkest of times, when the world seems to be burning down, the most powerful force of all is not fear, but the simple, profound comfort of one living creature reaching for another.